All right, Jabosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Share to thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Tavshin Pei 5785, the Tovsim Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the shiurim and drashos this year as a schus for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, the Kelman Mishpacha, in memory of Amit ben David Levi Zichron Livracha. Our week of learning sponsors, Zevi and Shoshi Daniel Leili Nishmas, Zevi's father, Yitzchak Yisrael ben Rafal Noach Zichron Livracha, whose yard site is on Zion Teves. You hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all of those in the Refuah Shav and Tchel, the Kol Cholei Yisrael, that Rebbe Shalom should bring our hostages home b'shalom and b'karm, and should allow our holy soldiers to be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedeihem. So with that, let us begin. A lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Continuation of incredible Gemara. Hopefully, we're going to try to finish the parak in Meretz Hashem. We are picking up today's daf is Chaf Beis 22. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Chaf Aleph on base 21b. At the last two dots on the page, V'kosev Sefer Torah Lishmo. One of the first things that a king has to do upon assuming the throne is that he has to go ahead and write a Sefer Torah. Tana. So the Gemara says what's important to understand over here is the king Dafka has an obligation to write his own Torah, and he cannot content himself with the Sefer Torah that he has from his father. So let's say his father was a king also, or his father wasn't a king, but he has a Sefer Torah from his father. He says, I have that Yerusha, that should be enough. So the Gemara says, no, the halacha is he must write his own Sefer Torah. So Amar Rava, Afapi shenicha lo avos of la'adam Sefer Torah, mitzvah lichtov mishalo. Now Rava expands this a little bit and says, this is not just true of a king. This is true in general of any person. Every single individual has an obligation to write a Torah. Right? Va'atu kisvu lachem es hashira hazos. Write for yourself this shira, this Torah. So even though a person has a Torah from his father or from his family, there's an obligation for every individual to write his own Torah. And I will say, there's much to talk about like this in terms of how one fulfills that obligation. Because that's a pretty steep obligation to have to write your own Sefer Torah, right? So what exactly that means and how exactly that manifests itself and how one could fulfill that, so that's an entire discussion. Again, beyond our scope for this morning. But the idea is that every person has an obligation to write their own Sefer Torah. Shnei Amar, Vatu Kis, good. So, Vatu Kis Lachem Masashir Azos. Esvei Abaye. So Abaye says, V'kosev lo Sefer Torah L'shmo Shlo Yisna B'Shalach Hirim. Melech in head yod lo. But here's the problem. The problem is, the Gemara says, it sounds like that is dafka a din by the king and not by others, right? The Torah says, v'kasav lo sefer Torah l'shmo. The king should write his own Sefer Torah. And again, the drasha is, he should not content himself with someone else's Torah. He's got to write his own. So it sounds like the obligation to write one's own Sefer Torah is dafka a din by the king and not a din by other people. So what's going on over here? No, the king has a different halacha. The king has an obligation to write two Torahs. Two Torahs. This is incredible. Okay, the Sanya, the kasav law is Mishneh, kosev l'shmo shtei Torahs. The king has an obligation to write two Sifrei Torah. Achos sheyotza v'nichnasas imo. So one that goes and comes with him. Right, so in general, a Sefer Torah that he just keeps with him wherever he goes. V'achas shemunachas lo bebeis kinazav, and one that he places in his treasury. It's actually a very beautiful Gemara. So the king places one Torah that goes with him, and one Torah that remains in his treasury. I will say almost like the beautiful, beautiful metaphoric symbolism. You know, the treasury is the place where you keep that which is most valuable to you. So what does the king keep in his treasury? Nothing other than, obviously other riches also, but a Sefer Torah. So one Sefer Torah for the treasury, one Sefer Torah to take with him. Achas, Shlimar says, Osa shiyotza v'nichnesas imo, the one that the king takes with him everywhere he goes, Osa kamin kamiyah, v'tola bezroa, he makes it like an amulet. In other words, he makes it very, very small, so that literally, again, he could wear it, Shnei Emar, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi tomid, Kimimini bal emot. Supposed to say so beautiful. So the king keeps the Sefer Torah that he takes with him in and out. He makes it small like an amulet. He could wear it. So combination wherever he goes. In fulfillment of the pasuk, I keep Hashem before me at all times. If Hashem is on my right, I shall not falter. Such a beautiful and incredible idea. Obviously, you can't wear the Torah amulet into the bathhouse, into the bathroom. So again, pasuk says it'll be with him and he will read in it, which indicates to us he only wears it into places that he could read it. Places where he can't read it, he doesn't wear it. So obviously the bathroom where you can't read it, or the bathhouse, he won't take it with him. Incredible. So we'll say this is a very interesting Gemara. So Mar Zutra says as follows, or some say Mar Ukva, in the beginning, Torah was given to Klal Yisrael b'ksav ivri v'lashon hakodesh. So ksav ivri is a particular type of script, not the script that we use today. The script that we use today, we're going to see, is called Ashuris. So again, originally Torah was given in Ksav Ivri and Lashon HaKodesh, what we call Lashon HaKodesh. So Chazra v'nitla hamimei Ezra b'Ksav Ashuris v'Lashon Arami. So apparently in the days of Ezra, remember again, Ezra leads the wave of exiles back to Eretz Yisrael to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. And it was also a tremendous renaissance for Klal Yisrael as well. So in the days of Ezra, Torah was, so to speak, re-given. There was a re-acceptance, but this time again, the script that was used was Ashuris script and Lashon Arami, and Aramaic. So the Gemara says, Beru lahem Yisrael Ksav Ashuris Lashon HaKodesh. So Klal Yisrael settled on Ksav Ashuris, the secondary script, which was the script used by Ezra, and ultimately again Lashon HaKodesh. Lashon HaKodesh, v'nichu lehedyotos, ksav ivris v'lashon arami. And ultimately, again, they left for the hedyotos. We'll see who the hedyotos were in just the people. Ksav ivris and lashon arami. Man hedyotos, who are the hedyotos? Rav Chisda kusoi. The kusim. Somewhere says, my ksav ivris. What is ksav ivris? Rav Chisda ksav libuno. It is what's also known as ksav libuno. Okay, another name for ksav is, Rashi says, last Rashi on the daf, libuno, osios kidolos kein osan shekosim b'kmios mezuzos. This is a script or a handwriting made up of very large letters that you'll often find in amulets. Okay. Tanya, Rabbi Yossi says as follows: Roi haya Ezra shetinasin Torah al yado Yisrael. Ezra was so great that technically speaking, Torah could have been given through him. Malay Kidma Moshe, had it not been that Moshe Rabbeinu had lived before Ezra. So Moshe, who Omer by Moshe says, Moshe Allah Ela Elokim. Pasuk says that Moshe ascended to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Ezra Omer, who Ezra Allah mi Bavel. So it uses the simulation of aliyah, of ascension, by both of these men. Ma aliyah Omer kan Torah. Af aliyah Omer lahalon Torah. So just like the aliyah said by Moshe Rabbeinu represents Moshe Rabbeinu is bringing down of the Torah, so to the aliyah mentioned by Ezra is also Torah. The Moshe Omer by Moshe Rabbeinu it says Va'usat tziva Hashem ba'isahi v'lamed eschem chukim u'mishpatim. Right by Moshe Rabbeinu it says, and Hashem commanded me at this time to teach you laws and statutes. By Ezra who Omer Ki Ezra heichin levavel lidrosh es Torah Hashem Elokav v'lasos ulalamed b'Yisrael chok u'mishpat. So again, you see this very similar wording by Ezra and by Moshe to highlight this idea that Ezra really was on the same level as Moshe Rabbeinu, and had Ezra lived before Moshe, it would have been Ezra who brought down the Torah. And even though Ezra didn't merit to bring down the Torah, but yet Ezra merited to affect certain changes in Torah, specifically again the writing. Right beforehand, again it was Ivris, and Ezra changes it to Ashur Shnei Amar. Both at top of Chav Beis 22a, the Ksav Hanishtavun Ksav Ha'aramis Umetorgam Aramis Uksiv, and the pasuk says Lo Kalin Kasva Lemikra Upshara Lahoda Lemalko Uksiv, because of his Mishnah Torah Hazos Ksav Haroi Lishtanos. Okay, so we'll say some dramatic change occurred under Ezra, and again we switched from Ksav Ivris to Ksav Ashuris. Lama Nikra Ashuris. By the way, why is it called Ksav Ashuris? Sha'ala imahem me Ashur, because it came back with the people from Assyria, from Bavel, from Ashur. Tanya Rabbi Yomi says, "B'tchila b'ksav zen nitna Torah l'Yisrael." So this is actually interesting. Now the Brisa suggests the following: originally, Torah was in fact given in Ksav Ashuris, the present script that we have today. What happened? Kevan shechatu nepach lahen l'roatz. Once Klal Yisrael sinned, so literally again, Ksav Ashuris became splintered. If you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, so B'ksav zeh is the last of the wide lines in Rashi. B'ksav zeh nitna Torah l'Yisrael b'mei Moshe v'lama lo kahalin kisva l'mikra d'cheven shechatu b'bayis rishon u'baz v'satorah nepach lehem l'roas. So apparently this script was lost during the days of the first Beis Hamikdash as a result of our sin. And then what happened? So the Gemara said, when Klal Yisrael did Tshuva, i.e. with Ezra, so then the script returned. Shenemar, Shuva lebitzar aser hatikva, gamayom magid mishnah ashiv lacha. Lama nikra shma Ashuris. So why is it called Ashuris? Shemu usheres biksav. It's a very beautiful type of script. Rabbi Shmuel Silber said first wide line. Rabbi Shmuel Elazar, Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, Mishum Sha'amar Mishum Rabbi Elazar Hamodi, Ksav zeh lo neshtana kol iker. Not true, right? The script that we have has not changed. Has not changed al Shaneh Mar Vave Ha'amudim. Now, interestingly enough, this is talking about the hooks of the curtains for the Mishkan. Ma'amudim lo nishtanu, just like the pillars of the Mishkan never changed. Af Vavim lo nishtanu. So a play on words. So right, Vavim means the hooks that the curtains attach to. So here he's using Vavim to mean the letters. The letters that just as the pillars didn't change, so the Vavim didn't change as well. Va'omer, ve'la Yehudim kichsavam v'chil shonam. Mala shonam lo nishtana. Just like the language of the Jews didn't change. Af kisvam lo nishtana. So too their writing did not change as well. Ela ma'ani makayim es mishnah haTorah hazos. So what do I do with that lashon of mishnah haTorah? L'shtei toros. This, once again, I circle back. Mishnah Torah doesn't refer to a shinui, to a change in Torah, i.e. a change in script, but rather it refers to the two Torahs of the king. That the king writes not one Torah, but rather two Torahs, one Torah that goes and comes with him, and a second Torah which remains inside of his treasure house. Osa sheniyotze v'nichneses imo, osa kamin kimya, v'tola bizrosh ne'emar shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid. And the one that remains in his treasure house, that's regular Torah. But the one that goes and comes with him, that's written in amulet form. We're in amulet form, so that literally you could take it with him wherever he goes. As the pasuk says, I have placed Hashem before me at all times. So beautifully. V'idach. But the other opinion, Udarsh is Mishnah Torah, for this whole thing about the changing of the script. Hai shivisi my darish bey. How does he dash in the pasuk shivisi Hashem and Egdi Samid? Homi ba'alei chid Rav Chana bar Bizna. Rav Chana bar Bizna, Amr Shimon Chasida, ha-mispadal tzarach shiyira atzmo ki l'shchina kenegdo. But so when a person davens, he is supposed to view as if the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is literally right opposite him. So again, two different ideas. Shneimar shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid. So we'll say so very beautiful. So one opinion says shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid is a reference to the king's personal Torah. He makes the Torah like an amulet, so that this week he keep HaKadosh Baruch Hu opposite him at all times. The second opinion says no, Shivis Hashem L'Nei is not unique by a king, it's for everyone. What does it mean? That when I daven, I should view as if the Shekhinah is directly opposite me. It's interesting, the application is different, but the concept is the same, right? Whether it's talking to the king or whether it's talking to the individual, the idea is there's this concept. This is what the Bala Tanya brings down, right? In the beginning of Tanya, first, right? God awareness, that everything is about God awareness. If you could create proper God awareness in your life, then by definition it changes everything. Mishnah Berurah has it also. Right? That's why again the Shulchan Aruch opens up with Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid. Mishnah Berurah says you can't compare a person who realizes that he's living under the watchful eye of the king to a person who thinks that he's far removed. A person has God awareness fundamentally changes and shifts the way we behave day in and day out. Rabbi Shimon Damar Ksav Zeh Lo Nishtana Mai Lo Kalin Kasva Mikra. So according to Rabbi Shimon, who says that the script never changed. Torah was given in Ksav Ashuris and remained in Ksav Ashuris. What does he do with the phrase in Sefer Daniel? Lo kalon kasava lemikra. So the Gemara says very interesting. Amarav bigematria echtalon. So both say. So this is referring to the episode of Belshazzar. We saw this Gemara Maseches Megillah, right? Belshazzar was one of the Persian kings. He thought that there was a prophecy that the Jews would be in exile for 70 years, and after that they'd be redeemed. He miscalculated the years. He thought the 70 years had elapsed, and he made a big party that the Jews were not going to be redeemed. And in that party, what did he do? Beautiful Agarata Megillah. What did he do? He brought out all of the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash, and he used them in his own personal party, celebrating almost like a theological conquest over the God of the Jewish people. So at this party then there was this dramatic episode of like literally writing on the wall. You know the expression writing on the wall? That comes from the story of Belshazzar. There was some miraculous writing on the wall that indicated that Belshazzar was going to experience a significant downfall. So the Gemara says that it refers to that story. Amarav begematria echtav lahon yatis idach pus chamatz. So the Gemara says, so in the story of Belshazzar, so the message of Belshazzar's impending doom was not written explicitly. Rather, the Gemara calls it written gematria. But gematria doesn't have to necessarily mean numerical value. Gematria also means like shorthand. My parish lahu. So what did it mean? Mana takal ufarsin. Mana elokach machusa v'ashlam eslach. Mana means Hashem. This was the message to Belshazzar. Hashem has calculated your reign, and it has come to an end. Takilta b'maznei v'shtacha chasar. God has weighed you in the scale, and you have turned out to be deficient. Parisas machusach v'yahava lemadai uparas. Your kingdom has come to an end, and it is going to be given over to Persia and to Media. Shmuel says, Mimatos ninakfi alorim. This is how the message was written. Rabbi Yochanan Amar anam lakas nisrafu. Rabbi Ashi Amar nama katel parson. So again, these are all different ways in which the message to Belshazzar was literally written on the wall, and each one served as a mnemonic for some type of message of his impending doom. Rabbi say, so just so you should know, halacha l'maisa, the Rabban paskins that indeed a king writes two Torahs, right? Not one, but two Torahs. One Torah that is small enough to go with him wherever he goes, and in fact, again, the Rambam brings down that it is written in amulet form, so that literally he could wear it. He could just have it with him at all times. And the other is a Sefer Torah that is kept in his treasury. So again, symbolizing this idea, Shivisa Hashem Lenegdi Summit, that at the end of the day I have to take a Chodesh Baruch Hu with me at all times, and one Sefer remains in the treasury, highlighting the idea that the most important possession of a Yid, and even of the king, who has many different possessions, is his Torah, is his Ruchnius. So beautiful. I'll say that idea of Torah being your most important possession is really, we know this. Everything else you acquire in this world you could enjoy for however many years you have in this world. But once you leave this world, those possessions no longer come with you. Conversely, the Torah that you acquire, the Ruchnius that you acquire, that is yours for all eternity. That's yours. You never have to part with that possession. Incredible. Mishnah in Ruchban al Suso. Ben Yoshin al Kiso, Ben Bisharvito. So as I said, some other halachas pertinent to a king. You cannot ride on the king's horse. You cannot sit on the king's throne, and you cannot utilize his scepter. Now, this is all referring to common people, right? This doesn't refer to other kings, as we're going to see in just a little bit. Like, you have David, who's the king, and then David dies. His son Shlomo becomes king. Shlomo could use the scepter, right? Shlomo could sit on the throne. The idea is these are halachas regarding commoners vis-a-vis vis-a-vis the king. So a commoner, I can't sit on the king's horse. I can't sit on the king's throne. I can't use his scepter. Then Rono Sokishu Mistaper. It's interesting. You cannot see the king when he's getting a haircut, or when he's unclothed. You can't go to the schwitz with the king, the bathhouse. Right? So I will say this is all interesting, all part of the motif of one has to have reverence for the king. So part of that is it's almost like you can split it up into three categories. Like active things you have to do for the king, things that you are not allowed to utilize because they're associated with the king, and not seeing the king in any way that could potentially diminish your honor and reverence of the king. So you can't go into the mikvah when the king is going to the mikvah. You can't go to the bathhouse. Can't be when the king's getting a haircut. No one's allowed to see him. Okay, says the Gemara. I'm Rabbi Yaakov. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Avishag. Muteres l'shlomo. Okay, so we'll say so. A little bit of context over here. This is Sefer Malachim, the end of Malachim Aleph. It's actually the Haftarah of Parshas Chayei Sarah. David HaMelech is dying. He's old. So the Navi says that they hired for him. They selected for him a young woman who is going to be his attendant. So the Gemara says her name was Avishag Hashunamis. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yaakov says, Avishag mutaris l'shlomo v'asrula adonia. So Avishag technically would have been permitted to marry Shlomo, David's son, but she would not have been permitted to marry Adoniah ben Chagis. Now Adoniah ben Chagis was also David's son, right? Adoniah ben Chagis, we saw him just a few days ago. He was the individual who claimed the throne for himself. David is dying. David did not explicitly appoint a successor. At the end of the story, he does. He did not explicitly appoint a successor. So because of that, Adoniah ben Chagis, the positive is Nasele Mor Ani Amloch. He says, I'm going to reign. I'm going to reign. So what ends up happening over here? So therefore, obviously at the end of that story, so David says explicitly, no, Shlomo is going to reign. So technically speaking, Shlomo would have been permitted to marry Avishag, but Adoniah would not. Why not? So the Gemara says, "Mutaris Shlomo demalachaya umelach mishtamish b'sharvito shemelach." Because again, it's interesting that the Gemara compares Avishag to the scepter of the king, right? The scepter is something that was utilized by the king. So Avishag was an attendant; she was a servant of the king, so she was sort of utilized by the king. Therefore, again, Shlomo would have been permitted to marry her had he wanted to. So the Gemara says. So Adoniah the head yotu. So the Gemara says, but she would have been prohibited to Adoniah because Adoniah ben Chagis had the status of a commoner. Even though he was the son of the king, he had the status of a commoner. So the Gemara says, Avishag Maihi. What exactly was Avishag's role in David HaMelech's life? Tichsev v'Melech Zakin Baba Yomim v'Yomer lo Avadav Yivakshu. So again, V'Ksev v'Yivakshu Nara Yafa Uksev v'Hanara Yafa Ad Ma'od v'Tehilo leMelech Socheres v'Tishar Seu. So Avishag she was an attendant. Now, what's interesting is, even though she was an attendant, right, the Navi goes out of his way to highlight that she was very beautiful. So why the need to highlight her beauty if she's just an attendant? This is actually very interesting. Amar Nin Saban. So Avishag wanted to marry David. She wanted to be one of his wives. Amar Allah, Asirasli. He said, I'm sorry, I can't. Now I'll say again, now all these things come together. Why not? David HaMelech says, I have reached the limit of 18 wives. I can't marry you, that'd be prohibited. So we'll say, this is actually fascinating. Amrale, so Avishag wasn't buying it. She thought it was just an excuse. So she says to him, Chasira leganva nafshi l'shalma. When the thief has nothing to steal, he portrays himself as a pious man. Right? So in other words, when the thief's not stealing, if there's nothing left to steal, suddenly he's a tzaddik. So what she was saying is, you're just too old to consummate a marriage. That's why I don't just say it for what it is. You would marry me, but you're too old. So what happened? So the Gemara says, Amar Lahu, Kiruli the Batsheva. So this is an interesting Gemara. So he says, oh yeah? He says, call in Batsheva. Batsheva was his wife. Uksiv, Vatava Batsheva Elam Elach Achad. Amar Yehuda Amarav, Ba'osa Shah, Kincha Batsheva B'shloshes Rei Mapos. So apparently, again, he engaged in multiple acts of relations with Batsheva to show to show Avishag Hashunamis that this was not an issue of his virility. Right? He was fine. This was an issue This was an issue that, again, he had 18 wives. He could not marry anyone else. Amar Shamar Abba Bo'u Re'eh Kama Kashin Gerishin. So here's what's interesting. So obviously there's an Eitzah. What's the Eitzah? Divorce one of the other wives and marry Avishag Hashunamis. Again, I both say, so just to be clear, it's not the pshat that David HaMelech necessarily was close with all of these 18 women, right? So again, just go ahead and divorce one of them and marry Avishag Hashunamis. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? Now, he didn't take that Eitzah. What do you see from here? You see from here how difficult divorce is in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Po urei kama kasha gerishin. Shahari David HaMelech, he tirul lo yachid, velo he tirul lo garish. David HaMelech, they permitted yichud, right? Remember, we just saw in yesterday's daf, after the episode with Tamar, so they went in and prohibited yichud. So yet for David HaMelech, yichud was permitted because he was alone, after all, again, with Avishag Hashunamis. She was not his wife, even though, again, she's a single woman. And Lamaisi, again, we said that was part of rabbinic yichud. But nevertheless, again, they permitted yichud rather than have him divorce his wife. What do you see from here? You see from here how serious divorce is in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Lazar, so a very profound Gemara. Rabbi Lazar says as follows: Kol megarish esishta rishona, afilu mizbeach morid alav demaos. This is a very, very overwhelming Gemara. When a man divorces his first wife, even the mizbeach cries tears from Shene Amar, Vizos shenis tasu ksus dima, as mizbach Hashem bechi va'anaka, me'ein od panos el hamincha, v'lakachas ritzon biyadchem. V'ksiv, v'amartem alma, aki Hashem heid benecho ben eshes neurecha, asher ata bagarata ba, v'hi chavirascha, v'eshes brisecha. So it's interesting to hear the juxtaposition of the psukim indicates that why is the Mizbeach crying? Because ultimately, again, you have rebelled against the wife of your youth, and she is your friend, and she ultimately, again, is the wife of your covenant. So the Gemara is going to talk about this idea, about the unique relationship between a man and his first wife. And the idea of something tragic occurring when that relationship is undone. Now, both saying, now it's important. Well, let's finish. All right, let me just say it. Obviously, there are times when divorce is warranted, and there are times when divorce is necessary. What the Gemara is just pointing out over here is almost like a fundamental rupture in the fabric. Almost like of the natural order when a divorce occurs. It may be that it has to occur, that it's supposed to occur, that it's necessary to occur, but there's a traumatic upheaval that's associated with it. So Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar, ishto shel adam mesa, ela imkin mevakshim en mamon ve'elo. So the Gemara gets away from divorce for just a second. We'll come back to it, but then it goes back to this. It goes to this. The Gemara says a man's wife only dies if he stole money and needed to repay it, but didn't have the money to repay it. And they'll say, now what does one thing have to do with the other? So the Maharsha points out to her that there's a little bit of like a midah kineged midah. So if Reuven is married to Rachel and Reuven took something that did not belong to him, and now when it's time to give it back, he's unable to give it back, so therefore the Ribbon Shalom takes something from him as well. Rabbi Yochanan says as follows, very profound Gemara, if a man loses his wife, his first wife, We'll say very profound Gemara. It's as if the Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed in his days. The loss of a wife, the Gemara says, is like the loss of the Beis Hamikdash. Shene Emar Ben Adam Hineni Lokeach Mimcha Es Machmad Einecha B'Magei V'Lo Tispid V'Lo Tivke V'Lo Tava D'Masecho Uksiv V'Adaber Ala Am B'Boker V'Tamas Ishti Ba'erev Uksiv Hineni Mechalalis Mikdashi Ga'on Uschem Machmad Einechem. So what says the Gemara just notes the juxtaposition over here in these psukim. This is all from Yechezkel, how Yechezkel juxtaposes again the loss of his wife to the loss of the Beis Hamikdash. That the loss of one's first wife. And I will say, the Gemara keeps referencing the first wife, right? The loss of any spouse is traumatic. But what you see over here is over and over the Gemara pointing out about the profundity of a first marriage. a first marriage. So therefore, right, a man divorces his first wife. There's a profound impact of that. A man loses his first wife. There's a profound impact. There is something about that first relationship, that is fundamentally different and just pivotal within a person's life. Rabbi Alexandri, Kol Adam, I'll say first of the widest lines in the bottom. Kol Adam Shemese Ishta B'yamav Olam Chashach Bado. If a person loses his wife, his world becomes dark. Shneimar or Choshech Bi'alo V'Neira Olav Yida'acha. Rabbi Chanina Amar Psiosav Miskatzros. Says Gemara is so profound. His steps become diminished. A person almost like loses a spring in his step when he loses his spouse. Shneimar Yitzro Tzade Ono Rabbi Yavo Amar Atzasa Nofeles. His wisdom diminishes. Literally means his counsel falls. Or his wisdom diminishes. Without a wife, he doesn't have the same level of wisdom. Shneimar Vatashlichiyu Atzaso Amar Rabba Barachana Yochanan Kash Lazavu Kiryas Yamsa. So now the Gemara spoke a little bit about marriage. So the Gemara, actually, this is the famous Gemara at the beginning of Masechah Sota. It is more difficult, so to speak, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to make one shidduch like it is to split the sea. Now, obviously, nothing is difficult for the Ribono Shel Olam, but the idea is that finding a shidduch is like a splitting of the sea. Meaning what? Just like the splitting of the sea went against the laws of nature, so if you think about it, finding a shidduch goes a little bit against the laws of nature also. You know, the commentaries of the Gemara and Sota, Rashi and Tosafot Shas both bring down this idea. They say, Adam Yachid v'isha yichida v'hu mezavgan. A man is an individual and a woman is an individual. I will say, the statistical probability of two people finding each other, right, and being compatible enough to build a life together in a world full of people is nearly like a statistical impossibility. It is almost as supernatural as an actual splitting of the sea. Incredible. Shnei Amar Elokim Moshe v'Yichidim Beisa Motzi Asirim B'Kosharos. Al Tikri Motzi Asirim Ela Kim Motzi Asirim Al Tikri B'Kosharos Ela Bechi V'Shiros. So as I say, the idea over here is that literally, again, Hashem takes individuals and allows them to live in the same house. That's a reference to marriage. And the Gemara compares that to Motzi Asirim B'Kosharos. He brings out captives at an appropriate time, a reference to Yetzias Mitzrayim, and by extension, Kriyas Yam Suf. Is that so? Is that so that it's so difficult that finding a shidduch is like a supernatural event? Famarav Yehuda Amarav, Arboim Yom Kodim Yetzias Savlad, Bas Kol Yotzeis V'Omeres Bas Ploni LePloni. But one second I will say, sounds like this process is preordained. 40 days before the embryo, before the child is even formed in utero, a heavenly voice comes out and says, so-and-so is going to marry so-and-so. So it sounds like shidduchim are preordained. If they're preordained, if there's a bas kol, then what exactly is, why so difficult? Why so difficult? To which the Gemara says, Lokashia, habizug rishon, habizug sheni. Shabbos say, this is fascinating. The bas kol, the heavenly voice that says so-and-so is going to marry so-and-so, that's your first marriage. That's your first marriage. And I will say, now you begin to understand why Chazal associates such profundity with a first marriage. The first marriage, the idea that a person divorces his first wife, the Mizbeach goes ahead and cries. A person goes ahead. Why? Because that marriage is ordained. I will say that again, I can't say enough. It doesn't mean that sometimes even those first marriages end in divorce. Sometimes, again, because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan, it's not the right thing for people to be together. But just understand, sometimes, a couple might get divorced and they might say, I clearly wasn't meant to be. No, sometimes the shidduch is meant, in general, sometimes in life, things are meant to be, even if they don't last. And we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. I don't know why this always like intrigues me. You have this yesod of endangered species, and people they get all worked up because the humpback whale is going to be extinct. So it presupposes that things are supposed to last forever. And who knows? In other words, when the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for example, right, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the Lev Yasan during the Sheshes Mebreshis, the Lev Yasan. And the Lev Yasan was created and then it was shechted. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I often thought that is an incredible metaphor for the idea that in life, some things are supposed to be created, they have a shelf life, and then they are supposed to come to an end. Not every single thing that Hashem creates is supposed to last forever. It's a very important yesod. We get into the mindset that things are supposed. No, sometimes things serve a very specific purpose for a very finite amount of time, and then it's time to move on to something different. But again, even if that's what's supposed to be, it doesn't in any way take away from the fact that the event was purposeful, meaningful, and impactful for the duration that it lasted. It's very, very profound. So the Gemara says, listen to this. The Gemara says, Zug Rishon, your first marriage, that's preordained. Second marriage, the Gemara says, that's what the Gemara says, Kasha l'zavgun kekriyas yamsuf. So that's where it's much more difficult, like the splitting of the sea. Now, again, the Rashi in Sota brings down why is this? Because for a second marriage, Rashi says, there's a lot of moving pieces. Right? There's a lot of moving pieces. For a second marriage, often, Reuven was married to one person. Rachel was married to one person. So Rashi brings down, Reuven's wife dies, and Rachel gets divorced, and this and that, and there's a whole, it's a whole chess, a life chessboard. So that becomes much more, quote unquote, complicated, and that becomes a little bit like, almost like Yamsuf choreography for the Ribono Shel Olam. Incredible. Both say, for everything in life, there is a replacement, except for the wife of your youth. Again, this idea that the person you start out life with, the person you begin your life with, that is a unique relationship that cannot be replicated. A person may find contentment and love and happiness in a second marriage, but of course, it'll always be different than the way things started out in the beginning. Good. The Gemara says, "Masnila Rav Yehuda Rav Yitzchak Barei ein adam motze koras ruach ala me'ishto rishona." A person only finds true life tranquility with his first wife. Shne'emar Yehi mikorech baruch v'sameach me'eshes amabez ne'urecha. So I'll say, so this is actually a very interesting Gemara. So just stand over here. Rav Yehuda is saying this over to Rav Yitzchak, his son. And he says to Yitzchak, his son, a man only finds true tranquility with, it's interesting, with his first wife. Now I was like, there's so much to say in all of these Gemaras, and a lot of like good Sheva Brachas Torah in here also. I was like, but the idea is, when a person marries his first wife, if he's young, often the responsibilities and the pressures of life are not there. And therefore a person is able to kind of like lose themselves in the happiness of marriage without anything else going on. Any subsequent relationship, a second marriage, so beautiful, wonderful, loving, has all of its other pieces associated with it. So the koras ruach, the inner tranquility and the inner peace, is usually not there. Now again, it doesn't mean it's not beautiful, and it's not wonderful, and it's not incredible, and it's not spectacular. Of course it is. But Lamaisa, it has all of its other complications, which are just part of life. That almost like tranquility, right? It's almost like, also, if you ever see it, if you're under a chuppah with a chassan, you can think about your own chuppah. The great schus to be under like a lot of chuppahs, and you see it's like that innocence. Some would call it naivete, others would call it stupidity, right? But again, but there is like that goofy, like innocence and happiness that's just there. That's like, you see these couple and they're looking at each other and it's like, there's nothing else in the world. There's nothing else in the world. Like the world could stop and these two people would not notice a thing. They wouldn't notice a thing. You can't recapture that later on in life. You can't. You could find happiness and you could find love and you could find all beautiful things. But that type of almost like emotional, love-filled aloofness, it only happens in the beginning of your life journey when you find someone. Now again, whether that's the person you continue the life journey with, not, that's all other complicating things. But the only time you find that, right? The only time you find what Rabbi Yehuda calls that koras ruach, is when you're young, and ultimately, again, Ishta Rishona, first marriage. So listen to this. Amalei, so we'll say, 22b. So now remember, this is Rav Yitzchak, this is Rabbi Yehuda saying this to his son Yitzchak, who says, beautiful Gemara. Amalei, Kigon Man. So now, Rabbi Yitzchak, the son, says to his father, Dad, can you give me an example of that? Like, do you know a couple like that, right? Where they were young and they had like just this tranquility and this beautiful love. Amarlo, kigon imcha. How beautiful is that? How absolutely beautiful is that? So Rabbi Yehuda says to his son Rabbi Yitzchak, yeah, like your mother. Like your mother. It's such a beautiful, beautiful Gemara, and such also like a profound exercise, like in Shalom Bayis, and what it means to convey to our children love and emotional connection and attachment in marriage. So so his son says to his father, can you give me an example of a man who found inner tranquility in his first wife? To which Rabbi Yehuda said, yes, like your mother, me and your mother. So Moshe says, listen to this. Now the Gemara says, really? So the Gemara says, "Vaha mikri le Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yitzchak brei." Yet Rabbi Yehuda said to his son Rabbi Yitzchak, quote to the pasuk, "Omotzi ani mar mimaves es haisha asher hi mitzudim v'charamim." So Shalom Aleichem says in Koheles, I have found something more bitter than death, a woman. And I will say, now understand, by the way, just so you appreciate this, I will say, now this Gemara makes a lot more sense after we did the sugyas of Shlomo HaMelech, right? And we see Shlomo HaMelech got himself into tremendous, in other words, Shlomo HaMelech talking about women. That's what he's saying, that women are more bitter than death. So that would be a terrible, terrible, simple understanding of the pasuk. So Shlomo HaMelech was highlighting is the idea. Remember, he saw the negativity that could come out from marriage that is not properly planned. Right? This was Shlomo HaMelech's entire downfall. Remember, again, we referenced the story with Ashmedai. Shlomo HaMelech was a melech v'hedyot, or melech hedyot umelech. He ruled over everything that he ended up only ruling over his cloak or over his staff. What was all of that a result of? That was a result of poor marriage choices. So Shlomo HaMelech says, I have found something more bitter than death, a woman. Again, that's not Shlomo HaMelech railing against 50% of the population. That's Shlomo HaMelech going ahead and saying marriage could be the undoing of man as well. And what happens? So now Rabbi Yehuda is saying this to his son. V'amar kigon man. So the son says to his father, Dad, can you give me an example of like a woman like this that Shlomo HaMelech was referring to? V'amar kigon imcha. Wow. He said, yeah, like your mother. Right? So again, so which one is it, Rabbi Yehuda? Which one is it, right? Is your wife mamish like the most incredible woman in the world, or is she more bitter than death? To which the Gemara says, the truth is both. Iburi ma'avra. So the Gemara says, Amalek kigon imcha miskif takifa iburi ma'avra b'milah. So we'll say here was the difference. So apparently Rabbi Yehuda's wife had a really significant temper. A really bad temper. She would easily anger, but she was also easily appeased. So when she was angry, it was brutal. But Baruch Hashem, she had a midah that even when she got angry, she was able to calm down. She was able to be appeased, relatively quickly. So we'll say. So by the way, there's also, I think, just a profound yisod in this Gemara, which is that here it's the same marriage, right? It's the same in Rabbi Yehuda's mind. It's the same woman. Now, granted, it'd be curious to see if you asked Mrs. Rabbi Yehuda, right, who the problem was in the marriage. I don't know that necessarily she would go ahead and answer the same way, right? But Lamaisa will say, but there's a profundity in this. What's the profundity? I will say that the same marriage could be ein adamotze choras ruach elami ishto. The same marriage could be a beautiful, almost emotional attachment and aloofness, and could also be mar mimaves. Also better than that. I will say it's not a contradiction. Sometimes we think that good marriage means it's always good. It's always good. Nothing in life is always, I take that back. Daf Yomi is always good, right? But aside from Daf Yomi, nothing else in life is always good. This is so incredible. I tell you, I see this all the time with young couples who get married, and they have a fight. I remember I had an episode a couple of years ago. I had a young woman in the middle of Shara Brachas call me up sobbing. It was one of those phone calls. I was like you can't hear the word. So what happened? So we had a fight. During Shara Brachas. Yeah. And we had a fight. Yeah. And what? We had a fight. She could not get over this idea that they had a fight. And you know, like sometimes somebody tells you a problem, you can't laugh because then it's very, but like I'm thinking it's so cute, and like so naive. I don't know what your background is or what kind of home you grew up in. We have this expectation that good marriage means you're always together, you're always in love, right? There's always the birds are always chirping whenever you're with your spouse, right? And everything is great, and you agree on everything, and you're always like your hearts are locked together, and you're always in step, and that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Yeah, if you're married to if you're looking in the mirror, maybe you'll have that. But if you're married to another human being, right? There's plenty of times of discord. I will say this Gemara is so incredibly validating that you could have a marriage that is beautiful, that is loving, that is fulfilling, and you could even have moments that are more bitter than death. Now, that might be a bit hyperbolic, but you understand the point, right? You could have a beautiful and incredible marriage, but you could also have moments in that beautiful marriage that are really terrible. They're really terrible, and it's not a contradiction. Rabbi Yehuda says the same wife, who again I feel so privileged with, is the same wife who at moments, again, the marriage is unbearable. Such is the nature of loving and dynamic marriages. They could shift, they can morph, and they can move from moment to moment. Incredible. All right, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. So, good. Ein ish, Gemara says another beautiful Gemara. Tana, ein ish meis el ishto. When a man dies, his loss is felt most acutely by his wife. Or really the Gemara says only by his wife. Only by his wife. Ve'ein isha meis el labaylo. And when a wife dies, the loss is felt ultimately again. Did I skip? Sorry, I'm not sure on you. Sorry, Isha golamhi ve'ena karsa bris elamisha sakli. So the Gemara says interesting idea over here. Both say. So this is literally, Rav Shmuel Bar Unya says the name of Rav, that a woman, it literally, kli gola means an unformed utensil. And ultimately, again, becomes formed by her husband with whom she experiences the first act of intimacy. So what's the idea over here? That there is a unique connection between a man and a woman who experience a first act of intimacy together. There is a bond that is created between that couple. Tana ein ish meis el ishto. When a man dies, his loss is really only felt by his wife. Vein isha meis el labaylo. And ultimately, when a wife dies, so her loss is really only acutely felt by her husband. Now, both say this is actually a profound Gemara as well. Now, what about the fact that there may be other relatives? So in general, again, the way it works is like this. When children lose a parent, as difficult and as tragic as it is, again, it's the natural order of the world. You move on. Because that's the natural order of the world. Even Rahman al-Islam, when parents lose a child, they have each other in which to steady one another to be able to move forward. When a spouse loses a spouse, you lose your life partner. And when you lose your life partner, it just takes away the momentum of life in general. It's not the same to live a life without a partner, to live life without your other half. The Gemara says is one of them, and that loss is most acutely felt by the surviving spouse. Ein ish meis el ishto shneimar vayamas Elimelech ish naami vein isha meis el labayla shneimar va'ani b'va'oi mipadan meisa alai Rachel. I will say this week's parsha. Absolutely incredible. So remember again, so by a husband, so the Gemara brings a raya ultimately again from Naomi, that it says Elimelech, the husband of Naomi. Well, Elimelech was also the father of Machlon and Kilion. But you see from here that his loss was most acutely felt by Naomi. And again, Yaakov Avinu, this is in this expression, Yaakov Avinu is asking Yosef to bury him in Canaan. He goes to Va'ani, Bevoi mipadan mesa alai Rachel. He could have just said Mesa Rachel. What do you mean Mesa alai Rachel died on me? That the loss of Rachel Imenu was most acutely felt by her husband, by Yaakov. Incredible. Ein ro'on also. The Lord says, now back to the Mishnah. Remember again, the Mishnah said that you can't see the king when he's getting a haircut. Ein ro'on also. Interesting, a king has to get a haircut every day. So meaning a king has to be perfectly groomed. So the idea is he gets a haircut every day. Kohen Gadol Erev Shabbos. Kohen Gadol gets a haircut once a week. Kohen Hediot Echad L'Shloshim Yom. Regular Kohen gets a haircut once every 30 days. So Melech Mistar B'chol Yom, so the king gets a haircut every single day. The king always has to look beautiful. So the king has to be groomed every day. Kohen Gadol Erev Shabbos, Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Nachman, Amar Rav Yochanan, Hoil Umishmaros Mitzchachos. So I'll say, so the idea over here is that since the Kohanic shifts, right, since the Kohanic shifts change over once a week, so it makes sense that when the new shift comes in, the Kohen Gadol should be properly groomed, ready to meet them. So Kohen Gadol gets a haircut once a week. Kohen Hedyot Echad L'Shloshim Yom. Kohen Hedyot gets a haircut once every 30 days. Dichsev V'Rasham Lo Yigalechu U'Pera Lo Yishalechu. Kisumi Kasmas Rosheim. So we'll say, so over here the Gemara quotes on the pasuk from Yecheskel. So literally it says they should not shave their head, but they should also not allow their hair to grow too long. So the Gemara says V'Yalev Pera min Nazir, and you have Gzir Shav Pera from Nazir. First white line. Ksiv Hacha Pera Lo Yishalechu. Ksiv Hasam Gadol Pera Sa'aro Sho. Says right. It says by the Nazir. It says by the Nazir Pera. It says over here Pera also Ma'ala Lan Shloshim Yom Avkan Shloshim Yom. Just like by the Nazir, Stam Nazir says 30 days. So too again, the regular Kohen cannot allow his hair to grow longer than 30 days. Right? So we'll stop over here. We'll just actually finish up. Stam Nazir Shloshim Yom. So and the Stam Nazir goes for 30 days. Right? So we'll stop over. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem with the Kohen Hedyots grooming obligations in just a little bit. Shkoyach. All right, Chavra Zoom, have a wonderful day, everyone. We are on.